Hello and happy Sunday and welcome to chapter 23, Change of Plans. Before we actually begin, I just want to give you a quick room roundup. We have the lovely halo over here on the window. I'm going to, oh, no, I guess I can't. Well, foot. I was going to flip the view. We have Bermuda on the ottoman, and he is looking just as amazing as ever. And we also have our new kitten, Benjamin Banks, which I affectionately call Banks, just because. And Benjamin, of course, we call him Benjamin. And he, let me just see if I can try and get. So there is Bermuda. Looking all, and he's looking at his brother over here, and we now have the run of the whole house. So it's anybody's guess where he is and what he's doing and all that good stuff. And his poor meds, oh God, he's supposed to get them 5 times a day, and we're like trying to hunt him down as much as possible. But anyway, okay, thank you guys for listening to me ramble. I know many of you get on here to see Bermuda, so I just wanted to make sure that you could. All right, but he's doing lovely, and he's spending time with me at night, and we are back to being nice and calm, and we're back in routine again. So that is absolutely wonderful. Okay. Okay, so chapter 23, change of plans. So what happened yesterday was in the game book was a lot. Obviously, we met the trees, we had the marks, we had the glass blowing. We had the fair for the first time. So at the end of the time, if you remember, Jason has healed all the people that he needed to heal, and they went out and crashed out on the Memorial Meadow and recovered and had a lovely night under the stars. And Jason and Sandy are absolutely exhausted and have gone to bed. So that's where this is picking up from. Okay, I had a restless, dream-filled night. And they weren't the nice type of dreams either, like wishing upon a star or having endless nookie with Tyler. These were weird dreams, like I was deep underground and my bones were being crushed and compressed into diamonds. Then somehow I was walking around New York City as a diamond skeleton, and people were giving me money because they thought I was a street act. I didn't have anywhere to store the money since I didn't have pockets, so I went into a bank to open an account. The teller put on one of those eyepieces that jewelers use and examined me all over. He said my diamond wasn't worth much, although a few bones were salvageable. My cut was good, but my diamond color and clarity were just terrible. I had more crazy dreams like this too. I was trying to buy a suit at the mall, but my balls were so big I had to carry them around in a wheelbarrow. The snooty salesperson told me they didn't have a suit that would fit my size and I needed to leave. I told him I wanted to see his manager, and he said his manager wouldn't have a suit that fit me either. Now I needed to get out as he wanted to eat his french fries while they were still hot. I woke up at one point and I felt so hot, even though I was shivering like I was cold. When I finally woke up for real in the morning, I was exhausted. I was deeply touched to discover that CL had stayed with me all night, just to make sure I was okay. I spent a few minutes to check out my new marks. I traded a bit of magic with both of them, but there didn't seem to be any changes from last night. I decided to start my day off with a shower, but it only made me feel marginally better. Once Sandy and I both entered the sitting room for breakfast, CL and NL left to start their day. We received hugs and llama kisses and agreed to meet again for supper. Breakfast was mostly quiet. Sandy looked as bad as I felt, but we were both determined to persevere and make it through. We both moved like we were really old people with horrible arthritis, and after a bit it got really funny. When we got out into the hallway and started to jog to our first discussion, I'm pretty sure we looked ridiculous. Sandy confirmed it when she said we looked like 2 peasants in Siberia trying to make it through a snowstorm. For some reason, we both thought that was hysterical and laughed all the way to the meeting room. When Balaji and Amaya saw us arrive, they thought we'd partied a little too hard last night. They were quick to point out that as such young supernaturals, we couldn't expect to keep up with the more powerful folks. We needed to take care of ourselves and make sure we had an adequate amount of sleep. Sitting down for the discussion didn't help either. I nodded off 2 times and Sandy at least 3 before she leaned over and suggested we come up with a different plan. We desperately need to try to do something different today, I said back. We are right down in front, which is normally a great place to be, but I feel like we're being so disrespectful falling asleep like this. I completely agree, Sandy said softly. It's just that I can't help it. I'm so tired. Anyway, I suggest we turn this into a rest day and hit it again tomorrow. I know you wanted to go to the concert tonight, but I'm just not sure I can make it. Forget the concert, I said. There will be other gatherings and we can go to the concert then. I do feel like we should do a little something though, even if it's only to wake up, eat supper, and maybe have a brief walk through the memorial garden. She nodded thoughtfully. What do you think about having another go at finding your force rune at the fair? Oh, now that sounded good. We know how the fair is laid out, and we've already looked at several shops. This time it could be a targeted shopping trip. We just get in, shop for the charm, and get out. No chocolates or home goods or glass blowing. I love the idea, and we told Balaji and Amaya, who quickly agreed it was a wonderful idea too. We must have looked pitiful as we hobbled off because Balaji picked us up and flew us all the way back to the suite. I was so grateful and so out of it that I gave him a full llama kiss. Oh, sorry, been around the llamas too long, I murmured as his eyebrows shot up. I was asleep within 3 minutes of walking inside. This time my sleep was deep and restful, and I woke up feeling much better. I still wasn't perfect, but now at least I had a bit of energy. Sandy was doing much better also, and we were joined for supper by NL, CL, MM, and his grandmother. She'd been through the shrine and came out the other side as a natural. Once again, it felt like a nice family supper as everyone shared stories about their day. MM's grandmother was going down the same path as CL, as she now looked and felt a whole lot younger. She was positively bursting with new energy and just starting to come to grips with the fact that her life wasn't going to end soon. Instead, she had a whole new world of adventure opening up to her. In some ways, I think it was a bit overwhelming for her too, as I saw MM giving her loving glances and making sure she was taken care of when she got lost in thought. At one point, she started talking about MM and being able to really see him grow up. The emotions got too much for her, and MM just gave her a big hug and told her she was being an old fuddy-duddy. CL, of course, chimed in with NL, and he got misty-eyed too. NL then gave him a big hug and told him he was being an old fuddy too. I'm the young one, I told Sandy, so you gotta be the old fuddy. Then I gave her a huge, exaggerated hug. She just laughed and hugged me back. That's right, and you can't get rid of me either. I'm your fuddy godmother for life. That was the perfect comment to lighten the moment, and soon we were back to eating and telling stories again. We also got an update on the Centaur Supernaturals, 12 mages and 122 naturals so far, and the numbers were still going up. The Centaur nation was beside itself with joy at finally being represented in the supernatural world. The talk shows and recorders had lots of new llamas to interview and stories to tell, so NL and CL were old news now. It wasn't like they could go back to their old lives though, as they were still the de facto leaders of the supernaturals, and there was a lot that needed to be worked out with the council and House ATAC. We also learned that the healing last night had been successful for everyone. I was glad to hear that, as I was still secretly worried that my new power with the marks had messed with my abilities somehow. Bermuda sat at the table with us in his little hammock seat. Whoever was making the food had fashioned a special treat for him. He had a plate of little creations that looked like bugs. They looked as though they were made of something like brown gravy jelly, and Bermuda loved them. The chef had arranged them like ant soldiers defending a stash of tuna against an invading group of beetles. We all thought it was such a neat presentation, but Bermuda ate up both sides of the conflict and then ate the tuna too. He spent the next few minutes licking his chops and looking very pleased with himself. Once supper was over, I checked with Sandy, and she was still game to continue our search at the fair. NL said she wanted to stay behind and work on some outfits for us for the next day. I thought that was great, as I wasn't sure what we should wear to meet the council, but I was pretty sure it wasn't jeans and a t-shirt. Sandy said we were just going for a short trip, so we would be fine on our own, but that was quickly shut down. I couldn't argue, as CNL's help had been invaluable last night. In the end, the Centaurs decided that MM and his grandmother would go with us. She was feeling full of energy, and she said she could easily carry one of us if she needed to. I already knew Mr. Muscles could carry me just fine. Sandy reiterated that this was a quick shopping trip. We were going to go in, find the Rune, and get out. No shopping for chocolates or casual browsing. MM's grandmother said she was quite used to managing a herd of centaurs and getting everyone where they needed to be. She would make sure we stayed on mission. I just chuckled inside, as she was the talker, and I could see her being the one that got the most easily distracted. I also realized I couldn't call her MM's grandmother forever, so I gave her a nickname, GM. That stood for Grandma Muscles, and she loved it. She started flexing to show She started flexing to show she had big guns now. ML just laughed and had a flex off with her, so she switched to telling stories how skinny MM was when he was little. Watching MM squirm as she told kid stories about him was just delightful. Everyone got ready faster than I expected, and soon we were headed down the hallway again. Bermuda was in his backpack, ready for another interesting evening. I had my 4 surfers dudes with us, gliding along and keeping all 4 eyes out for danger. This was GM's first time seeing the underwater theme, and MM took great joy in pointing out all the fun details. We took the manful staircase to the first floor, and GM really appreciated all the stone men on display. She especially liked the Adam statue on the first floor, although she said he needed a proper rump to round him out. Once we were out the front door and into the garden, Sandy revealed that she had a plan of attack. She'd looked through all her welcome stuff from the gathering and found a map of the fair. She brought it up with her bank stamp and then made it visible for the rest of us. She'd marked all the charm shops and crossed out the ones we'd already visited. Looking at the overview, I realized we'd mostly covered the left side of the garden last night. There were still several charm shops at the right that might be what I wanted. We started with the nearest shop, but it was on the main walk and close to the front of the house, so it was super expensive. It was laid out like the fancy one shop. Each charm had its own spotlight and its own fairy. The cheapest charm was over 100,000 pearls, so we moved along quickly. As we moved off the main path, the prices came down a lot, but were still beyond what I had to work with. True to her word, GM kept us on track, and even though she pointed out GM kept us on track, even though she kept pointing out all the fun places we passed. We hit 11 shops, zigzagging to reach them all, but nobody had a charm that sounded right or prices that I could afford. We again ran into the problem where the charms were shielded and I had to pay to even examine them. I understood why they did it, as it made the charms seem more mysterious and therefore more valuable. It also probably limited their charm designs getting stolen, but the whole system was just frustrating. Finally, we ended up in the last shop that Sandy had marked, and it was way in the back of the garden and well off the main path. It was called a Tin Charm, which sounded like it shouldn't be too expensive, but the entrance was shaped like a pair of boobs in a bright red bikini. That didn't give me a whole lot of hope. Once we got inside, though, I saw it was clean and well organized. It also had a bit of an identity crisis, as it couldn't seem to figure out if it was a porn shop or a serious seller of magic. The shop friends reminded me of Jessica Rabbit. She wasn't bad. She was just drawn that way. She had purple hair and, yes, the carpets matched the drapes, and enormous boobs that would have made her fall over in real life. She did nothing for me, but I'm sure she was a hit with the bachelor party crowd. It also occurred to me that she wasn't very true to life, so she probably wasn't threatening to the bachelorette crowd either. The goods at the front of the shop at the store were all about shaking it, thrusting it, enhancing it, or strapping it on. The best part was, none of it was shielded, so I picked up some promising toys and dove into their inner workings. They had the force rune all right. Some of them had multiple force runes, but they were all made out of straight lines and looked like Sandy's charm. Sandy and GM were having a wonderful time distracting the shop friend and asking all kinds of naughty questions. MM looked a bit nervous and stuck with me the whole time. I shook my head at Sandy to let her know I'd come up blank, and we headed deeper into the store. That's when things changed. The toys faded away, and the real charms for real mages made an appearance. The back section was pretty big, almost as large as the fancy charm shops, and there were way more customers. The shop friends changed from a Jessica Rabbit type to more of a Tinkerbell, and I saw several of the customers picking up the charms, testing them out, and making purchases. This was a lot more like how I thought a charm shop should be. We got to meet the shop owner, a mousy little mage who introduced himself as Mop Top. I've never heard anyone called that before, but he said it was a nickname and he'd left his real name behind long ago. Sandy talked shop with him for a while I continued looking around, and once he found out she could make charms, he really opened up. I only half listened as I mentally zoomed in and out of all the different charms. I was in heaven as none of them were shielded, and it wasn't long before he turned to me. "You have the look of a man who's searching for something," he told me in a questioning voice. "I'm searching for a force rune," I said, "and I'm looking for one that is very fast. I'm trying to make a shield, and I need something that can repel fast projectiles." I liked the shop a lot, and it wasn't trying to hide anything, so I decided to just be open too. Maybe if I told him exactly what I needed, he could help me find it. I finally had some pearls, so I didn't mind paying for a charm. I just needed to find the right one. I thought he'd be surprised, but he nodded like he got questions like that every day. You are a very young mage to already have begun searching for specific runes," he said, "but I'm not surprised after talking to your mentor. She is well on her path to becoming a master of charms. I'm afraid I can't help you directly, as I don't make these charms myself. Instead, I have a whole network of amateur charm makers that list their goods with me for sale. Running a shop is a whole different skill set from making charms, and it takes a lot of time and attention to do it right. Most amateur crafters don't have the aptitude, inclination, or selection of goods to start their own collection. So instead, I get to display their wares and have wonderful chats with people like you. It's nice being in the charm business without having to do all the work." He smiled happily. "It's profitable and fun for both me and my suppliers. It's always best when both parties are happy. Who knows, maybe one day you'll be a charm maker yourself and we can talk business, yeah?" I liked this guy. He didn't look like much, but he seemed to run a good shop. "I'd love that," I said sincerely. "I don't know anything about haggling, shop friends, or setting up for a fair. I'd much rather leave that to you. I do have a question, though." Mop Top nodded and got a serious look. "Why are the charms so expensive?" He burst out laughing. Then he looked at Sandy. "Has he made his first charm yet?" "Not yet," she replied, "but I'm sure he will before much longer." Mop Top chuckled again and gave me a sympathetic smile. "My young mage, I'm not laughing at you. I'm chuckling at myself and how innocent I once was." His voice took on a lecturing tone. It sounded like this was a conversation he'd had many times before. "You have to understand, I travel to many fairs and tournaments each year, and the question I'm always asked by young mages like yourself is, why are charms so freaking expensive? All fresh mages think you need to do is memorize a pattern, find a good material as your base, and simply make a charm, right?" I'd never made a charm, or even talked to Sandy about how to make them. She'd wanted me to at least get the point where I could use them first. Then she'd said we could talk about the details of charm crafting. I just pretended like I knew what he was talking about and nodded confidently. The process really is that simple, but the execution, that's where it gets tricky. You see, you have to keep the whole pattern in your head the whole time. And it can't waver at all. Every loop has to be crisp, every detail exact. If you think that's easy, try writing your name and then writing it again, except you have to keep it looking exactly the same as the first time. You have to start at the same place, swirl your letters exactly the same, dot your I's and cross your T's exactly the same. It's much harder than you think, and you're using something you've written all your life. When you're making a charm, you need to be at least as familiar, if not more so, as writing your name. Most mages give up at this step. They find they don't have the patience or the mental ability to do what is needed. My rough estimate is only about 1 in 100 mages continue on to the next step. The next step is actually burning the charm into the material. Depending on how complex the layout is, that could involve a lot of magic. The magic must be powerful enough to create the magic channels and leave a residue of magic in the lines of the charm. Some lucky mages have a high flow, so they can burn quickly. If you are not so lucky, then you must keep applying magic while keeping the perfect image in your mind and not moving it at all. Again, very few mages have the mental stability and flow to burn a good charm. Probably 1 in 100 mages continue on to the third step. The final step is to keep growing and learning, and to not get discouraged when you... The final step is to keep going and learning, and to not get discouraged when you make failed charm after failed charm. Take yourself for example. If you started with a simple charm and put in the practice and work, you might need 10 or 12 times before you get your first successful charm. It takes a lot of power to burn a charm though, so it will likely take you a month to recharge between attempts. That means it would probably take a year of effort for you to make one successful charm. He paused to let that sink in. A year? It takes a talented mage a year to make their first charm? That's insane! No wonder most mages don't continue on to become charm masters. Of course, I wasn't most mages. I can see by your face that you already think there is no way it would take you a year to make your first charm. He burst out laughing again. Ah, to be so young. You might well be right though. You might be the 1 in a million mage that has a high flow, a high capacity, unlimited patience, excellent visualization, and a teacher willing to share what she's learned. Still, just imagine with me that it took you a year to make your first successful charm. How valuable would it be to you? I'd never sell it, I said honestly. I might sell my second or third one, but I'd never sell my first one, especially if I went through so much to get it right in the first place. For sure, Mop Top continued. Now let's fast forward 100 years or so. You've researched, tested, and perfected a charm that you think other mages will want. It's complicated, so you only get it right 1 out of 5 burns. Your power has improved, but what you need to burn has increased too, so you can gather enough magic to try every week. That means you can burn about 10 charms a year. He paused to let that sink in. Now, how valuable are those charms to you? Really valuable, I admitted. I'd want to sell them for a lot. I've seen charms for 100,000 pearls, so I'm not sure it'd be as valuable as that. But I'd want to get as much as I could. He nodded. And that is the level of charms I have here. These charms are made by mages that can only make about less than 20 charms a year. They have other sources of income and other things they do, but charm making has become a passion for them. They are always pushing themselves to perfect their craft. They are looking to increase their success rate as well as broaden the selection of charms they can make. I love charms and I'm passionate about the craft, but I'm terrible at making them. I'm a good shopkeeper though, so this is my contribution, and maybe someday you'll make your own contributions too. He smiled kindly and patted my arm in a fatherly way. He also had a slightly quizzical look. I think I confused him a bit, as I hadn't burned my first charm, and yet I was already looking for a specific rune. He probably figured this was some sort of learning exercise from Sandy. For now, though, I must excuse myself. Please continue to look around. I hope you find what you're looking for. He bowed politely to us and hurried off to meet with another customer. I turned to Sandy. Is what he said true? Are the number of mages that can make charms really that low? She nodded. Yes, if anything, he overstated how many successful mages there are. I can make charms, but only because I can burn them quickly. I don't have to hold the image of the charm for long. I'm not at the best at visualizing complex shapes, but I am getting better. I was also very lucky to have a patient teacher that was willing to open up and show me what she knew. That leads me to another question, I said. How on earth do you have so many charms? Now I know how valuable they are. I realize you're carrying around a small fortune. She chuckled. You're right, they are valuable, and I probably shouldn't be carrying around so many of them. It's just I found that they are all useful in one situation or another, and I can't bear to leave any of them behind. As for how I got them, I traded for them. Ah, that made a lot of sense. I'd only been thinking about buying charms. Sandy knew me too well. She knew I'd want the rest of the story, so before I could ask, she continued with her tale. Lydia, my mentor in House Chicago, taught me how to make my first charm using a light rune. It's a great first charm for training, but it's not valuable at all. I did well enough that she decided to jump way ahead of complexity and taught me how to make a healing charm. She said that no matter where I went, a healer was always welcome. She was right too. It took a lot to accurately memorize the healing charm layout, and even longer to successfully burn my first one. Mages are always getting hurt for a variety of reasons, and everyone wants to have a healing charm. Originally, I sold my charms with the idea of buying what I needed, but I quickly found that trading charms was a lot more effective. Lydia had given me several of her old charms with the hope that I would be able to reverse engineer them and figure out how to make them myself. With John's help, I've been able to figure out a lot of them. Just knowing how they're laid out isn't enough, though. I still need to visualize the layout well enough to get a successful burn. Like Mop Top said, it really is a lot harder than you would think. The talk had given me a lot of ideas. I would need more information before I actually made anything, but I was already sure the visualize and burn method wasn't the only way of making charms. So how does the golem core fit into what you know about making charms? I asked. It doesn't, Sandy sighed. It's beyond anything I know or have heard about how this process is done. There is no way that golem core was made with one burn. It had at least a couple hundred runes and thousands of logical connections. Whoever made that core is a master beyond anyone we have here at the fair. The good news is we know something like that is possible, I said. I also have a few ideas, but I don't want to discuss them here. When we get back to Louisville, I'd like to revisit your healing charm and see if we can't find a different process of making it. Sandy loved making charms, and I could see she was dying to ask what I had in mind. But instead, she swallowed her questions, and we went around the rest of the store, searching for a good force rune. I searched the whole store from top to bottom, and the more I looked, the more discouraged I got. I saw a lot of runes and some charms with very complex inner diagrams. Knowing what I did now about the visualize and burn method, I could only admire the amount of work that had to have gone into making them. Finally, I was done. I'd looked everywhere and hadn't found a single good force rune. We said goodbye to Mop Top, and he and Sandy exchanged contact information. Oh, hey, Bubba. I was pretty sure he hoped to get some healing charms from him at some point in the future. I was pretty sure he was hoping to get some healing charms from her at some point in the future. I also made a mental note to suggest this place to Annabeth as well. Her charms are more of the feel-good variety, but right now she was just selling them as novelty items on Etsy. Hopefully she could get a lot more for them through Mop Top. I'd seen a lot of charms that did a lot of things, but none of them were designed to make you feel happier. When we got outside again, I felt restless. That was our last possible place to get what I wanted, and we'd come up empty. I wasn't ready to give up yet, but there wasn't anywhere else to look. How long have we been searching tonight? I asked Sandy. About 2.5 hours, she said. Considering we hit 12 shops, that isn't too bad. She paused for a moment. giving everyone a quick look. I know we said that we were only going to do targeted shopping, but I'm in the mood for a snack, and I'd love to show GM and MM the chocolate shop. Jason, are you alright if we go there before we head back? Of course, I said. Something sweet sounds nice, and it would be fun to check out the chocolate art again. I looked at MM and GM. You guys are in for a treat. I did my best to let my disappointment fall away as we walked to the other side of the garden. I'd had a good search, but finding the rune was harder than I'd expected. That was all right. Not everything in life came easy. Now I'd examined a lot of items and charms, I realized just how rare it was to see a charm with flow. All the charms I'd seen used straight lines with even widths. I'd been very lucky that Annabeth had an old, crushed healing charm. I'd been very lucky that Annabeth had the old, half-crushed healing charm when I'd been trying to make tea. That really was the only charm I'd seen so far that had lines that looked like they'd been drawn by a calligraphy pen. The chocolate shop ended up being the perfect counterpoint in our serious shopping. I felt emotionally drained from the constant searching, and MM and his grandmother's wonder at all the chocolate art was refreshing. I knew they liked adventure and discovering new things, and they ate it up, literally in this case, as Sandy treated everyone again. I got the phoenix egg again, as well as the rainbow-colored unicorn egg, but this time I also ate a whole table setting of a plate, knife, fork, spoon, and a wine glass. They were much smaller than real life, of course, as it would have been way too much chocolate, but there was something neat about edible silverware. Our centaur companions were having so much fun that Sandy suggested we go and visit Henry at the Spinning Tail. It had been so wonderful to be there for NL and CL's first magic, and she wanted the same for MM and GM. I thought that sounded like a good idea, so we headed down the path again. Henry had other customers when we first arrived, so we all had a chance to look around the shop and admire his work again. I still had Bermuda with me in the backpack, but he seemed calm, so I hoped everything would be okay. It wasn't long before Henry was free, and he was delighted to see us again. He was also more than happy to give the test of glass creation to two brand new supernaturals. He gave them a standard lecture about creating rather than destroying, and then handed them both a clear glass rod. GM went first, and she wove a basket out of glass, as in the glass actually split into strips, and then wove under and over and all around to form a small basket. It was totally cool to see, and again Henry was blown away by her talent. Come to find out, GM did a lot of weaving as a hobby and even sold some of her goods. MM went next, and he made a perfectly round glass marble. I was surprised to see what he'd chosen to make, but he said he liked playing with marbles as a kid, and he'd loved imagining finding a whole new world inside them. Plus, they just rolled and rolled and rolled, and he liked the idea of being that free to travel. Henry seemed very impressed, as he said it was quite hard to make something perfectly round. We didn't notice anything else until he put it in the stasis box and turned on the light. That's when we realized there was a whole little world inside the marble. It was clear glass on clear glass, so it wasn't something you could see until the light hit it just right. Then we could see a small town built into the side of a hill. There were buildings, trees, and a road leading into it. My goodness, I exclaimed. MM, this is awesome. I thought about making a scene, but I wasn't sure it would come out, MM said. He seemed a bit shy with all the attention. I was discovering that for all his muscles and good looks, MM was a sensitive soul. Once again, the whole experience was transformative for the centaurs. This was their first magic, and it really drove home the realization that they were different now. They really were supernaturals. They both teared up, and there was lots of hugs all around. GM came across as totally fun-loving and full of stories, but she was a sensitive soul as well. I had Sandy use my pearls to buy them lots of glass sticks as well, so they could play around later. We were all finished up and ready to head out when I had an idea. Henry, I'm sure you know all the vendors in this fair, so maybe you can help us. Do you know of anyone that would have an old-fashioned force rune? Old-fashioned, he asked. I hadn't really thought about it like that until the words popped out of my mouth, but yeah, old-fashioned seemed to fit. Some time ago, I ran across a healing rune in an old charm that had been half crushed. The rune was slightly different from modern healing runes that are in use today. I found the old version of Rune to be more versatile and more useful for what I need. I now need a Force Rune, and I was hoping to find an older version of that rune to work with. We've already been to every charm shop on the map and haven't found it yet. I've even looked inside appliances to see if the Force Rune they have is the older kind. Have you already been to the Tin Charm? Henry asked. It's got some interesting items in front of the store, but once you get past them, it turns into a real magic shop. Yes, we've been there, I said, and the front of the store is certainly interesting. The girls were loving all the merch. Speaking of that, why does Mop Top have a porn store for half of his shop? That seems like an interesting choice. Several years back, the other charm merchants didn't like how he did business. He didn't have as many charms and they weren't the highest quality, but they were a lot cheaper, and he was very open about what he was selling. His business grew quickly, and rich customers that used to go to their shops now went to see him instead. So they all got together and tried to run him out of business. In my opinion, he responded in a very smart way. He switched his entire shop to selling adult novelties, and all the fancy charm shops backed off quickly. They didn't want to have any sort of association with that. Then he rebuilt his charm business in the back half. The charm shops still leave him alone, as their posh clients wouldn't be caught dead in a porn store. He's no threat to them, and the clients he caters to probably don't have enough pearls to shop in the big stores. Well, that was interesting. Mop Top didn't look like much, but he was a fighter in his own way. It made me want to support him even more. I'd gotten us sidetracked from my original question, though, so I brought the conversation back to the old-fashioned Force Rune. It sounds like you've done your homework and really looked everywhere, Henry said. I can only suggest one more possible place. It's an odds and ends shop called the Stacks and Piles. The guy who runs it is an odd bird, but he's a nice enough fellow, and a lot of really old items end up in his store. Of course, a lot of junk ends up in his shop too, Henry chuckled. You won't be able to talk to him directly, at least not at first. You'll have to find something in that shop that's interesting, then ask him about it. His name is Biddy, and he hates talking to boring people. His name is Biddy? I said, really? It's short for Itty Bitty, and that's a nickname for some sort of inside joke, although I have no idea what it is. I looked at the rest of my crew. Want to give it a shot? I'm with you all night, MM said, and his grandmother nodded to back him up. Sure, Sandy said. I'm still feeling good, so let's do one more shop. Then we'll go back to the suite. Before you head out, Henry searched his pockets and then headed back towards the workbench. He came back with a small circular piece of glass. Let me give you one of my tokens. Show it to Biddy when you see him. He'll know I sent you and that I think you're worth talking to. We thanked Henry and told him we would be sure to stop by if we came back to the fair again. Then we headed out. The Stacks and Piles was only about 5 minutes away towards the back of the garden. MM and GM were still riding high on doing their first work of magic, so we talked about that all the way there. It was neat to see them so excited and happy. The break from searching had been nice, and the night now felt like it was full of possibilities again. I thought the storefront might look kind of junky, but it was actually pretty charming. The storefront had windows with old glass in them, dark and white wood, and warm lighting shining out. It kind of felt like a cozy Swedish bookstore, so I had a good feeling about it. The good feeling continued when we got inside. It was a cozy and well-stocked antique shop. There were dressers, tables, cabinets, and shelves of all kinds and colors. And sitting in the space was just about everything imaginable. There was a whole library of books, plates, utensils, figurines, bottles, jars filled with stuff, mirrors, pictures, candelabras, and even more stuff I couldn't identify. The whole place just screamed shopping excitement and treasure. My gay heart gave a squee, and I just wanted to just dive in and touch everything. It hit Sandy and GM the same way. "I'll be right over there." Sandy patted my arm absent-mindedly as she scurried off to whatever had caught her eye. "I'd better keep up with her," GM said, but she had a peaked look on her face that said she was after her own treasure. "How are you supposed to find something interesting here?" MM said dourly. This place obviously did not fill him with joy. Then he did the best thing possible. He put his big, strong arm around my shoulders and gave me a sideways hug. His practical tone and friendly touch grounded me and helped me snap out of my sensory overload. "Thank you, MM," I told him gratefully. "I needed that. If you see me starting to get lost in all the clutter again, just give me another squeeze." "That I can do," he said. "I think the girls are a lost cause, but I'm trying to keep you on track. Now, what do you think Henry meant by find something interesting?" I looked around again, and this time I noticed there was quite a few people in the store. I really had been mesmerized by all that stuff. Stuff. That was a good word. I was going to hang on to it. I wasn't just seeing wonderful treasures and priceless antiques. I was just seeing stuff. I took a deep breath, adjusted my thinking, and looked around a third time. This time I saw the shop friends. They looked like steampunk hat racks with metal arms. They had a small wheelbase, so they easily maneuvered through the open spaces, and their little thin arms meant they could reach things in the back of a shelf without knocking anything else over. They had gears and wheels in all the right places to help them move, and I thought they looked kind of cute. Their face was a flat disc with eyes, lips, and eyebrows all made up of little gears. Somehow they were expressive and human looking. "I think this is probably a test," I replied. "If we can find something magically valuable in all this stuff, then probably we will be interesting enough to talk to. If we can't, then Biddy won't waste his time." MM looked around in despair, but I had an idea. "Hold on to me," I told MM, and then closed my eyes and switched completely over to my magic sight. I was so grateful for MM's steady presence as I started to feel a bit dizzy. My magic sight was way more detailed than my regular sight. I could see more than just the outside of something. I could see completely through it. I was normally very comfortable with my magic sight, as I'd had to use it exclusively for weeks after I'd lost my regular sight. But with this much stuff, though, it was beyond what I was used to processing. I breathed through it and let my mind drift. I didn't focus on any one thing. Instead, I let it take in whatever it wanted. It took a few minutes, but I finally started feeling comfortable in the environment. I was good enough now to notice that there wasn't anything around me with real magic. There was a whiff of power here and there, but nothing special. My magic sight processes shapes and contours, and it sees everything in shades of gray. Only if magic is involved can it see in color. That was going to make it a lot easier for me to pick out something that had real power. "Okay, I'm doing a lot better," I told MM. "Let's start working our way to the right and circle the store. The girls went to the left, so we should run into them again at some point." MM kept grounding me with his touch as we started moving around the shop. I thought MM might have trouble getting around, as he had a much bigger body, but the aisles were wide enough to accommodate him, and he didn't knock anything over. We went pretty far to the right before running into the first wall. Based on how far we'd come, this shop was a lot bigger than it looked. We turned left and kept going. I thought we'd reach the back of the store pretty quickly, but instead we walked past a large archway leading into a whole new area. I didn't want to get sidetracked, so we just kept moving forward. Then we ran into another arch, and then another one. How big was this place? We finally reached the back wall and turned left. It had two smaller doors and one very wide entrance leading deeper into the shop. We reached the left wall, turned left again, and now we started keeping an eye out for Sandy and GM. They should be around in this area. We'd covered a lot of goods in the first room, and nothing here had any real magic to it. I was beginning to think this room was for mundane antiques only. We passed 2 arches on this side before we ran into the girls. We heard them before we saw them, and they seemed to be having a great time. GM had a quick wit and a lifetime of stories, and she was keeping Sandy well entertained. They were both browsing at high speed and happier than pigs in a yard full of mud. We hated to interrupt their bliss, but we did need to stick together. We picked an archway at random and walked into another room. This space was even bigger than the last one. Once again, we turned to the right and kept walking. I guess I wasn't moving fast enough, as Sandy politely suggested that I let MM carry me. That way I could devote all my attention to scanning. MM agreed immediately, so I guess he thought we were going slowly as well. I couldn't say no to Mr. Muscles, so I wrapped my arms around his strong shoulders and we headed off again. It certainly was a lot faster, and being carried by all that manliness was a nice bonus. Sandy was right. Now I didn't have to worry about walking. I could scan a lot faster, and we quickly covered the whole room. There were more archways leading out of the room, so we all agreed on a promising one and went to the next space. I was beginning to realize the stacks and piles was a labyrinth, as every room had multiple exits that led deeper into the shop. The amount of stuff we'd already seen was staggering. We were in our 5th room when I got my first hit. The room was smaller than most and filled with jars containing specimens. Some of the things were dry, like hair, leaves, and powders. Some of them seemed to be organs, though, and were preserved in what I guessed was formaldehyde. The light had a greenish cast to it, and the whole place was unsettling. It kind of reminded me of a witch's workshop. All it needed was a big cauldron in the middle of the room to complete the look. The contents of one of the jars shone brightly with real power. It was too bright for me to see what it was, so I had GM to take it down off the shelf. It was buried in the back behind a few other jars, so GM paid more attention to not knocking anything over rather than what was actually in the jar. When she finally looked, she screamed and almost dropped it. It contained a shrunken head, hair and teeth still attached. She put it down like it was hot, and we all freaked out with her. Needless to say, we left that room in a hurry. We proceeded with quite a bit more caution after that. We'd been thinking of this place as a fun antique shop. Now I knew it held some darker secrets too, and we all wanted nothing to do with some sort of weird voodoo head. We were 2 more rooms over before I got my second hit. This time the object had a gentle glow of residual magic, and I could see right away it was a small stone. It was flat, about the size of a silver dollar, and it had a rune carved on the top. The stone was very old, and the lines of the rune were worn and faded. They were still discernible, though, and I could see they were the old-fashioned rune. The lines weren't straight. They had flow and direction for magic. I had no idea what the rune did, but this was exactly what I was looking for. This was my interesting object. And so we end our deal. So next week is very exciting. We get to investigate even more, and yep. Anyway, all right, have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week.